The desert had a way of swallowing sound and giving it back as a hum that lived inside the bones. Calvin Reed rode that hum like a ghost rides a hymn, the big diesel breathing under him, the highway unspooling in silver bands beneath the headlights. Cold January air came thin through a cracked vent. The CB muttered static like a tired prayer. He kept one palm on the wheel, the other around a cooling mug of coffee that tasted like metal in church basements. He told himself he was fine. He told God he was listening. He told his late wife he was doing his best. The wind answered first. God and his wife stayed quiet. He had been hauling freight across the spine of the West for most of his life, long-haul miles measured not in exits, but in missing birthdays, missed chances, the kind of loneliness that teaches you the shape of your own name. Nevada at night was a different country, mesquite and shadow, salt flats that held the moon like a mirror nobody dared touch. Out there, with the gauges lit and the road a straight needle, you could convince yourself the world made sense. You pushed east. The sun eventually rose. The next load waited. Men like him did not stop to count the cost. The figure appeared beyond the next swell of asphalt, thin, upright, wrong in some way he could not name. He saw it in the fuzz of exhaust haze and pale moon, a silhouette that made the hairs on his arms lift. Hitchhiker, he thought automatically, running through the routine. Slow, signal, keep the cab light off, never open the door more than a hand's width. But the closer he rolled, the more his belly tightened. It was the stillness. People by the roadside danced on their feet, cold and hopeful. This one stood as if the night were a photograph, and it had been pinned to the edge of it. Calvin eased off the throttle, let the rig coast until the trailer settled in behind him like a patient animal. He hit the hazards. Amber pulses washed over blacktop and yucca tips. The figure turned its head toward him. Not quickly, not with human curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, as if deciding to bring him into focus. His heart did the thing it used to do when the chaplain at his wife's hospice said the word terminal. A little flutter of denial, followed by a hollow thud of fact. He set the brake. He reached for the mag light beneath the seat and told himself not to be stupid. Men got killed for less than stopping for a stranger. Men got killed for more than that, too. He cracked the door. Cold air took his breath with greedy fingers. "You all right?" he called, voice rough from miles and coffee. "You need a ride or what?" The head tilted, measuring him. The face, he could not have described it if a badge demanded it, caught moonlight like water catches a coin. Something in him said, "Get back in the truck." Something older said, "Stay." There are crossroads you do not walk past. He stepped down in his boots, gravel ticking beneath soles, the long booms of the hazards beating like a slow heart. The desert smelled of alkali and old rain. He lifted the flashlight and hated the tremor in his hand. The beam found the figure's eyes. They did not blink. They reflected cleanly, not red like the eyes of an animal, not dull like the eyes of a drunk, polished, liquid, mirrors that did not admit to owning a face behind them. Time changed shape. The night pressed in as if listening. His voice, when it came, was smaller than he wanted it to be. "You hearing me?" Silence. The wind dragged a line through the sage. The CB hissed to itself inside the cab, a captive snake. Calvin swallowed. The grief he carried, years old, still warm, moved under his ribs the way a sleeper turns in bed. The figure took a step. Not a lurch, not a stumble. A smooth correction of distance, soundless on the shoulder. Calvin's body chose for him. He backed up until his calves met the step. His hand found the grab bar. His mouth said, "Okay," though he did not know to what. There is a place, somewhere between a heartbeat and a breath, where fear opens like a door and something wiser walks through. It walked through him now. He swung back into the cab. He thumbed the locks up. He reached across and unlatched the passenger side. The door opened. The figure climbed in with the patience of a surgeon, angling limbs that were almost human but not built for this exact geometry. It sat. It closed the door carefully, as if it understood the cost of replacing a hinge on a lonely payday. Calvin stared out at the dark strip of road. The windshield framed the desert like a chapel window. He put the truck in gear because that was what he knew to do when nothing else made sense. The trailer tugged. The rig rolled. He breathed. What came next should not have learned its way into his mouth but did, uninvited and certain, as if it had been waiting in the sleeper for years. What you are about to hear has been kept from humanity for thousands of years. And I need to warn you, once you understand this truth, your entire view of reality will shatter. This is not comfortable. It will challenge everything the church, the government, and society told you was real. If you are tired of the lies, if you are ready to see what is really happening, subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Because the story you are about to witness exposes a truth powerful people do not want you to know. There is no going back after this. The cab settled around them in a hush that did not belong to machines. His mirrors caught their twin cones of road and threw them behind like ribbons. The being turned its face toward the glass. Those eyes did not simply reflect. They received, as if the world outside entered and arranged itself inside a private sky. "Okay," Calvin whispered, to himself, to his wife, to the uncaring gauges that glowed like small altars. "If this is a dream, I do not want to wake up." He risked a glance. The passenger's hands rested lightly on its knees. The fingers were long with a grace that made him think of birds landing on water. The skin had a color he could not name, not gray, not silver, but something between storm cloud and pearl. He thought of the one time he had watched a meteor shower with his wife in the bed of his truck, both of them wrapped in a single quilt, counting wishes until they ran out of wishes and kept counting anyway. The sky had felt close enough to spill. The being beside him felt like that sky had decided to sit down. The CB cracked and coughed, and then went dead as if a hand had cupped it. Calvin's throat worked. "You speak English?" he asked, immediately ashamed of the bluntness, the old American habit of asking the world to sound like him. No mouth moved, no breath fogged the glass, but a voice rose inside his head the way a tide rises, calmly, relentlessly. "Yes, Calvin," it said, using his name with a tenderness that startled him more than the trespass. "Keep driving." He did. He could do that. He knew how to take a line and hold it through a night. He knew how to aim a heavy thing toward morning. He settled his shoulders. He pressed the accelerator until the engine found its steady hum. The desert rolled out, a black sea under a cold moon. In the passenger seat, a traveler from a place with no map watched the lane markers appear and vanish and appear again, and the waiting world drew closer like a promise. Inside the cab, the silence didn't just fill the air, it pressed against the walls like an invisible tide. The truck's engine hummed beneath it, steady, low, alive. But somehow even that mechanical rhythm sounded muted beside what now sat in the passenger seat. The being didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't shift under the rumbling vibration of the 18-wheeler. It simply watched, those dark, liquid eyes following the white lines on the asphalt as if reading a scripture older than Earth itself. Calvin Reed kept his hands locked on the steering wheel. The leather was slick with sweat, his pulse a drumbeat in his fingers. He'd picked up hitchhikers before, runaway kids, veterans, a woman once who said she was heading home and never told him where home was. But nothing about this creature matched any world he knew. There was no sound except the engine's breath and the wind buffeting the mirrors. He cleared his throat. "You got a name?" No answer. The figure didn't even turn its head. Its stillness made the air heavier. "Where you headed?" Calvin tried again, forcing a laugh that came out flat. "Ain't much out here but dirt and bad coffee." Still nothing. And then, without warning, a voice arrived. It didn't enter through his ears. It bloomed directly in the middle of his skull, clear as his own thought, but not his own tone. "You already know my name, Calvin." The sound, or the presence of it, made him jerk the wheel. The truck swerved toward the shoulder, tires shrieking against gravel before he yanked it back straight. "What the hell?" "Don't stop." He felt the words rather than heard them, resonating through his chest like low thunder. "What did you just... How do you know my name?" "Because you asked for answers. You've been asking for a long time. I'm only here to answer." Calvin's throat dried. He glanced sideways, but the creature hadn't moved. Its gaze stayed forward, calm, unblinking. The desert unrolled outside, endless and pale under the moon. He tried to breathe steady, tried to find something human in this moment. Anything. You can read my mind?" "I can hear what you're willing to speak beneath your words. I can feel what you hide behind silence." Calvin's chest constricted. "Then you know I don't want any part of this, whatever this is. You asked why the world feels empty. You asked why heaven feels silent. That's why I'm here." Calvin swallowed hard. His lips trembled around the word heaven. He hadn't spoken it in years without feeling bitterness burn in his throat. He stared through the windshield. The horizon shimmered with mirages, heat ghosts, even at night. The CB was still dead. No other headlights followed or approached. The highway belonged to them alone. He gripped the wheel tighter. "You think you know me? You don't. You don't know what I've seen." "I do," the voice said gently. "I know the first night you drove after her funeral. I know you left the flowers on the passenger seat and drove till dawn so you wouldn't have to look at the empty bed. I know the prayer you said before sunrise, the one where you told God you didn't believe anymore." Calvin's breath broke. "Stop it. You asked for truth. That's what I'm giving you." He felt anger spark beneath his fear. "If you're some demon, say it now. Say what you want. I got no soul left worth stealing." The alien turned its head then, slowly, deliberately. Under the instrument lights, its skin caught a faint glow, like metal warmed from the inside. "You've been taught that demons exist outside of you, Calvin. But hell doesn't need a devil. It only needs distance from what you truly are." The words coiled through him, unwelcome but familiar. Something inside whispered that he'd always known this, that every empty prayer, every unanswered cry into the dark, had been his own echo coming back. He forced himself to focus on the road, anything but those eyes. "You're saying heaven and hell don't exist?" "They exist," the being said softly, "but not where you've been taught to look." The cab lights flickered as if agreeing. He laughed once, hollow. "You got a funny way of preaching for someone who doesn't breathe." "I don't preach, I remind." They drove in silence for several miles, the desert opening around them like an ocean of dust. Calvin's mind spun backward through the years, 25 years on the road, Endless towns sliding by, gas stations glowing like lonely stars. He'd built a life out of motion. After his wife died, it was easier to chase the horizon than sit still long enough to remember her face fading in the hospital window. He'd once been the kind of man who believed in Sunday mornings, who kept a Bible on the dashboard, who'd whisper grace before every meal, even when it was just a truck stop burger at 3 a.m. But faith had slipped away in inches, not in a crash. One missed prayer at dawn. One too many funerals for men who prayed harder than he ever did. Until one night, he realized he didn't know who he'd been talking to all that time. Now the voice inside his head spoke as if it had always been there. You call it faith when you reach outward, hoping something answers, but true faith begins inward. He barked a humorless laugh. Sounds like something a shrink would say. You some kind of cosmic therapist? Call me whatever helps you listen. The road curved through a canyon of black stone, stars bright above like watching eyes. Calvin felt the strangeness settle into something almost peaceful. His fear hadn't left, but it had changed shape. Less a terror of the unknown and more a trembling recognition, like remembering a dream from childhood. He whispered, mostly to himself, I used to think heaven was up there. Clouds, harps, my wife waiting. Thought hell was down there. Fire and chains. And now? He exhaled. Now it all feels like highway, long and empty. Then you're closer to understanding than most. Calvin frowned. Understanding what? That heaven and hell are not directions, Calvin. They are reflections. Every thought, every act, every moment of love or hate, each builds a room inside your soul. When you die, you simply step into the house you've built. The words came like slow thunder, settling in the cab's confined air. He didn't reply. He didn't trust his voice not to break. The being's gaze returned to the window. The desert blurred by in streaks of silver gray. You're closer to heaven than you think, it said at last, almost tender, but you've been taught to look in the wrong direction. Something cracked quietly inside him. He wanted to argue, to demand proof, but all he could do was drive. The highway stretched endlessly east, the world both familiar and suddenly new, as if the map of his life had turned itself inside out. For the first time in years, Calvin Reid wasn't sure where he was going, or if he'd already arrived. The miles passed like a quiet prayer, neither of them finished. The sky was a low dome of cobalt, heavy with unspoken things. Calvin didn't know how long he'd been driving since the voice entered his head. The gauges had stopped meaning anything. The odometer could have rolled through eternity for all he cared. He just drove until the alien spoke again, not aloud, but in that way that vibrated through his chest. Pull over ahead. Calvin blinked, scanning the empty highway. Pull over? Out here? There's nothing but sand and ghosts. Exactly. There's a memory I need to show you. He frowned but eased the truck onto the shoulder. The asphalt hummed beneath the tires before settling into silence. The alien pointed toward the faint outline of an old way station, half collapsed, forgotten by decades of desert wind. The place looked like it hadn't seen a driver since the 1970s. Sun-bleached wood, a rusted roof, tumbleweeds tangled in the remains of a fence. Why here? Calvin asked. Because the earth remembers. This place once measured weight. Tonight it will measure truth. The words made something cold crawl up his spine. He turned off the engine. The sudden quiet hit like a punch. The night was vast, the kind that made a man feel small enough to vanish between breaths. The alien stepped down from the cab. Even the motion of its limbs seemed too fluid, too certain, as if gravity were an agreement it could cancel whenever it pleased. Calvin hesitated, then followed. Gravel crunched under his boots. The air felt thick, charged, almost electric. Every hair on his arm stood up. "Feels like a storm," he muttered. "There is one," the alien said, "but not of wind." It walked toward the center of the cracked asphalt lot and knelt. Its hand, slender, luminous beneath the moon, pressed against the ground. Calvin expected nothing. He'd seen mirages, desert heat that turned air into water, but this was different. The sand quivered under the touch. Then, faintly, light began to bloom outward in perfect circles, rippling across the lot like a stone dropped into a still pond. "Jesus," Calvin whispered, stumbling back. The light grew stronger, shifting from silver to gold to deep violet, until it painted their faces with colors no sky had ever owned. The alien's voice came calm, steady. "Don't be afraid. This is not magic. This is memory." The ripples rose higher, forming a dome of shimmering air. Images swirled within, distant suns burning blue and red, planets spinning through mists of color, oceans boiling under alien skies. Calvin saw entire civilizations flash before him like sparks, towers of glass that touched clouds, beings made of light shaping worlds with their hands, laughter like music bending through the void. Then, destruction, fire, collapse. He staggered backward, shielding his eyes though the light wasn't blinding. "What is this? What are you showing me?" "The record of creation," the alien said. "The universe never forgets. Every act, every rise and fall, leaves an imprint. You live on a planet that thinks only the living keep memory, but even dust remembers its maker." The visions shifted. Luminous beings filled the sky, thousands of them, brilliant as suns. Some rose higher, glowing white-hot. Others dimmed, shadows spreading through their forms like ink in water. They turned against each other. The heavens themselves seemed to shatter. Calvin's breath came in gasps. That looks like war." It was, the first war. Not of nations, but of knowing. He watched, transfixed and horrified, as light clashed with light. One side rose like dawn breaking. The other fell like a storm of broken stars. Through it all echoed a vibration, not sound, not language, grief, vast and terrible. The alien stood, still watching the mirage as if it were remembering a dream long buried. "This is where the story of hell began," it said quietly. "Not in fire, but in forgetting." Calvin turned toward it, his face pale. "What are you talking about? That's angels. That's heaven falling. That's scripture." "It's truth before scripture." The alien's eyes caught the light, reflecting galaxies. Every world knows it differently. Your kind turned it into a myth of punishment, of sin. But what fell was not evil. It was separation. The images began to fade, leaving streaks of gold drifting through the night air. Calvin's knees gave out. He sank into the dust, trembling. "You're telling me those things, those angels, they fell because they forgot God." "Not exactly. They forgot that they were part of Him." Calvin's voice cracked. "That's the same thing. No, one is rebellion. The other is grief. They wanted to know what it was like to live apart from the source, to experience creation from the outside, and so they fell into matter, into bodies, into time. Many of them became like you." He stared up at it, the desert spinning around him. "You're saying, what? That humans are fallen angels?" "Fragments of them, yes, the echo of their longing. That's why you feel the way you do, why you look at the stars and ache for something you can't name." Calvin felt dizzy. His throat tightened until the words tore out raw. "No, that's That's heresy. That's witchcraft. This is memory, not magic. The universe keeps records of everything, even the fall of angels. The light from the sand pulsed once more, softer now, fading like breath on glass. Calvin stumbled backward. "Turn it off. Whatever you're doing, stop it." The alien looked at him with an expression almost human, almost sorrowful. "It's not something I can turn off. You asked to see. You needed to." "I didn't ask for this," he shouted. "I just wanted to know why. Why everything feels so damned empty." "Because you are looking at the reflection instead of the source. Every being who forgets where they came from builds their own hell." The night went silent again. Only the wind moved. The last trace of the vision dissolved into the sand, leaving it untouched, ordinary. It was as if nothing had happened. Calvin stood shaking, hands in his hair, staring at the ground that moments ago had opened the sky. "You expect me to believe that hell isn't real? That it's, what, some kind of feeling?" "It's the echo of separation," the alien said softly. "The absence of remembrance. When light forgets it is light, it believes it's darkness. That belief becomes its prison." Calvin's breathing slowed. The rage drained from him, replaced by something worse. Understanding. He remembered nights when he'd driven for days without sleep, convinced he was escaping something he couldn't name. He remembered sitting in the sleeper with a bottle and feeling like he was buried alive, even with the stars blazing outside his window. He whispered, "So hell's not below us." The alien's gaze turned toward the horizon, where faint lightning flickered far away. "No, Calvin. Hell isn't a place you go after you die. It's the distance you feel when you stop believing you're part of the infinite. It's not down there. It's right here." The words hung between them, heavy as thunder before rain. Calvin didn't know what to say. He only knew that somehow, on that cracked stretch of forgotten highway, the world had shifted beneath his feet. The alien turned back toward the truck. "Come. The night still has more to remember." Calvin followed, silent, glancing once over his shoulder at the sand that looked ordinary again. But the wind still shimmered faintly, as if something unseen had written its story there and refused to let it fade. The rig growled back to life, headlights cutting through the desert like two blades of pale fire. Calvin's hands shook on the wheel. He didn't speak, neither did the being beside him. For a long stretch, the only sound was the low hum of diesel and the whisper of tires on sand-scattered asphalt. But the silence wasn't empty. It had weight now, like the air just before lightning touches down. The alien finally said, "You're afraid of what you saw." Calvin's laugh came out sharp, bitter. "Afraid? I just watched angels fall out of the sky like dying stars. You think fear covers it? You saw what your ancestors remembered, but could not understand. You saw consciousness learning to divide itself." He frowned. "Consciousness? Don't give me that philosopher talk. What I saw looked a lot like war. War is only the visible symptom. The sickness lies deeper." The alien's voice was soft, steady. "Heaven and hell are not places, Calvin. They are frequencies of awareness. Every being, every species, learns to tune itself to one or the other. Some rise through compassion, others fall through isolation. The choice is always the same, only the scale changes." Calvin stared at the road, but it was slipping from focus. The blacktop seemed to ripple, the painted lines bending like threads pulled through water. "You're saying those things out there, the ones I saw, they weren't fighting God? They were fighting themselves? They were fighting to prove they didn't need him." The words slid through him like cold iron. He swallowed, his throat tight. Sounds a lot like the story I grew up with. Lucifer's rebellion. The alien's gaze turned toward the windshield, the desert reflected in its eyes. Lucifer. The name carried a vibration that made the dashboard lights flicker. The bringer of light. Yes, I knew him. Not as an enemy, as a mind too vast, too bright, to remain contained by harmony. He believed freedom meant separation. He wanted to create without the pulse of the source echoing through him. Calvin's voice dropped to a whisper. And that was the fall. The first fall. The truck rolled past an old road sign half buried in sand. Calvin barely noticed. His heart was pounding, but not with fear anymore. Something stranger, heavier. You're telling me Lucifer wasn't evil? That he was, what, misunderstood? He was radiant, the alien said, the most radiant among us. His light was so pure he mistook it for his own. He wanted to see what creation would look like if it reflected only him. The source allowed it, because freedom is sacred even when it leads to suffering. That's how darkness was born, not as punishment, but as experiment. Calvin gritted his teeth. So you're saying God let it happen, let everything fall apart. Would you rather he commanded obedience? A creation without choice is machinery, not life. The words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He thought about all the times he'd prayed to be forced to believe again, to have his doubts ripped out of him so he could stop feeling guilty for not being sure. The being continued, voice like wind over glass. When your kind first heard the echoes of that story, you turned it into hierarchy. You made devils out of teachers and angels out of prisoners. You reversed the parable to protect yourselves from the terror of freedom. Because freedom means you cannot blame anyone else for what you are. Calvin's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles gleamed white. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? The question lingered like static. The stars above seemed to tilt closer, vast and indifferent. Every sermon you heard as a child taught you that hell waits below the ground. But you've already felt it, haven't you? The emptiness after she died. The nights you drove until sunrise just to stay ahead of the silence. That is hell, Calvin. The gravity of isolation. The same gravity that pulled the bringer of light down. He felt his jaw tremble. You leave her out of this. I can't. She was your last tether to heaven. When she left, you mistook her absence for God's. But the truth is simpler. You fell out of connection, just as he did. Calvin slammed his palm against the steering wheel. The horn blared into the emptiness. Stop saying that name like you knew him, like you knew any of this. The alien turned its gaze toward him. I was there when the first light divided itself. I watched harmony fracture into individuality. Do you think I'm guessing? The words didn't sound like boasting. They sounded like confession. A deep, ancient weariness hung in them. He wasn't cast out, Calvin. He walked away. The others called it pride. I call it grief. He wanted to create his own reflection of heaven, but without love, it curdled. Light without connection becomes fire. Fire consumes. Calvin shook his head, his pulse pounding. So, he built hell. He built the idea of it, and humanity built the walls. For a moment, the horizon blurred. The desert around them shimmered as if space itself had turned liquid. Calvin blinked and saw cities rising and collapsing in a heartbeat, towers of flame turning into mountains of ash. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left him trembling. He whispered, "Why are you telling me this? I'm no priest." Because you're a mirror. You live the same pattern every day, longing for connection, but worshiping solitude. You drive through darkness and call it work. You avoid love and call it strength. Do you see it now? You are what he became, a spark afraid of being part of the fire. Calvin's throat closed. He wanted to deny it, but the truth hit too cleanly. The alien turned its face toward the window again. Your species inherited that confusion. You think light is possession, that to shine means to conquer. But light that tries to own instead of share always falls. That is what happened to him. That is what is happening to you. Outside, the sky shifted. Clouds of desert dust glowed faintly blue as the moon caught them. Calvin's vision wavered. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw wings in that light, vast outlines stretching across the sky like shadows made of memory. He blinked, and they were gone. He whispered, "So what happened to him? To Lucifer after he fell?" "He became the teacher you fear most," the alien said. "Every soul that descends into forgetfulness follows his path until it remembers. Even he has not stopped remembering. The return is long, but it is certain." Calvin exhaled through his teeth, a long, shaking sound. "That's blasphemy." "No," the alien said gently. "That's mercy. Even the brightest flame can burn itself out and still be reignited. The source wastes nothing, not even rebellion." The words hung there, impossible and beautiful. Calvin stared ahead. The road shimmered in the heat rising from the asphalt. It looked like it was bending, melting, as though the truck were climbing a slope that wasn't really there. The stars above seemed to tilt, wheeling in slow, impossible arcs. For a moment, he felt weightless, as if gravity itself had forgotten him. He whispered, "If that's true, if even he can go home, then what's left to fear?" The alien's voice came soft as wind through dust. "Only the belief that you're alone. That belief built every hell there ever was." Calvin drove on through the endless dark, the line between heaven and hell blurring in his mirrors until both looked the same, just reflections of light trying to find its way back to itself. The road stretched out ahead of them, a ribbon of pale gray disappearing into the throat of the storm. Calvin hadn't said a word since the last confession spilled from the alien's mouth. His mind was a mess of static, half scripture, half disbelief. The sky had begun to bruise, that sickly green color the desert takes before lightning remembers it was born in heaven. He could feel the change in the air before he heard the thunder. The alien broke the silence. "Calvin, you're shaking." He exhaled through his teeth. "You talk like you know me better than I do." "I do." The voice came without sound, yet the cab vibrated faintly, as if the truck itself were listening. "I didn't come to preach. I came to confess." That word, confess, landed heavy in the air. Calvin's grip on the wheel tightened. "You've got nothing to confess to me. I'm just a driver trying to make his delivery. You're more than that, and I've done worse things than you can imagine." Calvin barked out a laugh, rough and dry. "Worse things? You're not even human." "Exactly. And that's the sin." He turned his head slowly. The alien was staring ahead, its face lit by the flicker of lightning on the horizon. "We interfered," it said quietly. "My kind came when your species was still learning how to speak to fire. We thought we were helping. We wanted to teach you what we knew, how energy responds to thought, how sound creates form, how love is the frequency that sustains everything." Calvin frowned, shaking his head. "You're talking nonsense." "No, I'm talking memory." The alien's gaze never left the road. We shared knowledge that wasn't meant for power, but the moment we showed one man how light bends to will, another used it to build a throne. The moment we taught one woman how to heal, a priest called it sorcery and took her life. You divided heaven and hell long before your churches named them. Heaven became hierarchy. Hell became punishment. All because your kings wanted control. Calvin's throat went dry. You're saying all religion is a lie? Not a lie, a translation. But every translation distorts what it loves. He stared out into the storm. The wipers smeared the glass with streaks of rain that glowed each time lightning split the clouds. His mind reeled. So what? You're saying you were gods? We were teachers. Some of us still are. Some of us became prisoners of what we created. Calvin shuddered. The thought was too big, too strange, but something about it, something in his bones, felt true. If you're confessing, he muttered, what exactly are you guilty of? The alien finally turned to face him. Its eyes held no light now, only reflection, like deep wells of water. We gave knowledge before you learned responsibility. We handed fire to children and watched them build altars of war. We told you that thought shapes matter, and you used it to dream of domination. The power of creation twisted into the hunger for control. That's how heaven fell to earth. Calvin's voice cracked. You're talking like a preacher again. No. Preachers speak to be believed. I speak to remember. A bolt of lightning exploded across the desert floor. For a heartbeat, the whole world turned white. Calvin felt the steering wheel vibrate as thunder rolled through the chassis. The air in the cab prickled with static. The alien continued. When you die, Calvin, nothing ends. You don't vanish. You shift. Consciousness is not a candle that burns out. It's a wave. It changes frequency. The body is only a temporary receiver. Calvin's knuckles whitened. Then heaven and hell, where do they fit in? They don't. They're not destinations. They're channels of awareness. You carry both inside you every moment. Every act of love is heaven remembering itself. Every act of cruelty is hell trying to forget. Calvin swallowed, his throat aching. Then what happens to the soul? It learns, it listens, it keeps returning until it remembers what love actually means. He wanted to laugh it off, to call it lunacy, but the words hit him with the force of truth. The miles slipped away beneath the tires, a rhythm like heartbeat. Rain began to patter against the windshield. Then where's God? He whispered. For the first time, the alien didn't answer right away. It looked toward the mountains, jagged silhouettes trembling beneath flashes of light. The road hissed beneath the rain. When it finally spoke, its voice was quiet enough to almost be human. Everywhere that love is allowed to exist, and nowhere else. Calvin stared at the horizon, at that endless split between earth and sky. His chest felt tight. You mean all the pain, all the wars, all the loss? That's because we stopped loving? No. You stopped remembering that you were love itself. The universe doesn't punish. It mirrors. The storm deepened. Thunder rolled through the canyons like a beast waking from sleep. Calvin felt his heart beat faster, sinking to the rhythm of the wheels. If that's true, he said, then why do bad people keep winning? Why do good ones die young? Why didn't God stop my wife from... The words broke off. He couldn't finish. The alien spoke softly. Because love never interferes. It only invites. The source gave even death the right to exist, because without endings, beginnings mean nothing. She didn't vanish, Calvin. She just changed channels. He shook his head. Don't talk about her. You talk about her every mile. You built your life around her absence. You keep her ghost buckled into the passenger seat every night. She's closer than you think. Calvin slammed his palm against the dash. Enough! The sound cracked through the cab, sharp as gunfire. The alien didn't flinch. Outside, rain hit harder. Lightning split the sky in jagged veins. The air inside the truck smelled like ozone and tears. He dropped his head, shaking. If what you're saying is true, then everything I've ever believed is backward. Not backward, just incomplete. Every truth your world holds is a half-truth. Heaven and hell, life and death, light and dark. They aren't opposites. They're the inhale and exhale of the same breath. You've just forgotten you were breathing. Calvin stared out the window, watching the rain blur the desert into watercolor. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but only one mattered now. So why tell me? Why not the whole world? The alien's voice lowered. Because you were listening. The storm roared louder, lightning flashing across the hood of the truck, painting everything white. The rig hummed as if the atmosphere itself had come alive. Calvin felt his skin prickle. He swore he could hear the electricity whispering against the windshield, like voices too ancient to belong to any language. He looked over, and for a heartbeat, the being wasn't a shape at all. It was light, pure, living, pulsing light sitting calmly in the passenger seat. He couldn't breathe. The alien spoke one last time, its voice both outside and inside him. This storm isn't weather, Calvin. It's memory. Every soul carries its own thunder until it learns to listen. Then the flash faded. The being was solid again, watching him with eyes that seemed to hold the reflection of every storm that ever passed across the earth. Calvin drove on, trembling, through rain that glowed faintly in the headlights, through air that hummed with something between science and prayer. He didn't know if the world outside was ending or just finally beginning to remember itself. The storm broke apart behind them, leaving the road slick and glimmering beneath the moonlight. The world smelled of wet earth and diesel, of lightning burned into the sky. Calvin kept the truck steady, his hands rigid on the wheel, knuckles pale from holding on to something he didn't understand. The alien sat silent beside him, watching the rain crawl across the windshield like veins of light. For a while, neither spoke, both listening to the steady rhythm of the wipers and the whisper of tires on soaked pavement. Finally, the being turned its head and said, "Let me drive." Calvin barked a laugh. "Not a chance. You don't even look like you could reach the pedals." "I don't need to reach them." "Yeah, sure," he muttered, keeping his eyes forward. "Next you'll tell me you can drive with your mind." "Not with my mind. With yours." Calvin stiffened. "You're not touching that wheel. Nobody drives this truck but me." The alien said nothing more, but its gaze lingered on him, unblinking, patient. The silence deepened until Calvin could hear his own pulse beating in his ears. Something shifted in the air. Pressure, warmth, an invisible current moving through the small space of the cab. Calvin. He ignored it. "Calvin, look at me." He turned, irritated. "What?" The being reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. It wasn't a touch in the way he knew it. It was a surge, like every nerve in his body caught fire, not with pain, but with knowing. The cab dissolved. The world fell away. The hum of the engine stretched into a single, endless tone, and that tone opened like a door. Time stopped behaving. Colors no longer belonged to sight. They became sound. Low, aching chords that vibrated through his ribs. He could hear the glow of the dashboard. He could see the pitch of his heartbeat. The sky outside folded inward, its constellations bending like silk, and for one impossible moment, he understood the structure of everything, the pattern beneath chaos, the pulse that connected stars to cells. He gasped, or thought he did. His body was gone. There was no truck, no steering wheel, no desert highway. There was only perception, endless and alive. Where am I? He tried to ask, but his words came out as light. You're seeing through my senses, the alien said. Not as a human, but as what you are beneath the flesh. Don't resist it. Just look. The world unfolded. Below them stretched the continent, mountains glimmering like the bones of old gods, rivers glowing faintly with the memory of starlight. Cities pulsed in clusters of golden sparks, each heartbeat of light representing something living. Calvin's vision adjusted until he could make out the shapes. Tiny orbs drifting above rooftops, highways, hospital beds, and fields. They looked like fireflies in a vast night. What are they? He whispered. Souls, the alien said. The living, not the dead. Every being you've ever met burns like that. Most don't realize they're asleep. He stared, overwhelmed. Some of the lights shone bright as suns. Others flickered weakly, barely visible. Many drifted close to one another, merging and splitting like breath. Why do some fade? They forget themselves. They mistake the dream for the dreamer. Every moment of fear dims them a little more. Every act of love makes them brighter. Calvin's vision trembled. He thought of his wife, of the nights she'd fallen asleep beside him, and the way her breathing had always matched his without trying. He saw her light, steady and radiant, somewhere in that web of glow, alive, beyond any map. He tried to reach toward her, but the moment he did, his perception faltered. Don't cling, the alien warned softly. Connection is not possession. To see her clearly, you must let go of wanting her back. Calvin's chest ached. I don't want to lose her again. You never did. You just stopped remembering the part of you that still touches her. The vision wavered. The lights flickered and rearranged, forming vast spirals, constellations of souls, each breathing, living, dreaming. The planet itself seemed to hum beneath them, not dead rock, but a living being, singing quietly to its children. Calvin could feel that song vibrating through him. It was beautiful and unbearable at once. He tried to speak, but tears, if they could still be called that, spilled from eyes that were no longer physical. I wasted my life, he said, all those years on the road, angry at everything. I thought the road was all there was. The road was never punishment, the alien said gently. It was preparation. Every mile taught you to move through emptiness without breaking. Now you understand what you were carrying. What was that? Silence. The space where love learns to echo. Calvin broke down. He didn't sob like a man. He shattered like a sound wave collapsing. The guilt he'd carried for decades burst out of him. Every harsh word, every quiet sin, every time he'd looked at the stars and cursed the God he still secretly hoped was listening. I don't deserve to see this, he choked out. No one earns sight, Calvin. It's grace. The moment you stop trying to deserve it, you begin to see it. He tried to steady himself, but the vision kept expanding. He saw energy coursing through the veins of the universe, lines of light connecting everything that had ever lived. He saw humanity as one great organism dreaming itself into existence, forgetting and remembering, falling and rising again. The beauty of it broke him open completely. Then, as softly as it had begun, the world folded back into itself. The sound of the engine returned first, the steady rumble of diesel beneath his feet. Then the smell of rain, the vibration of the steering wheel. The truck was still moving, perfectly aligned on the empty highway, headlights sweeping through mist. Calvin gasped, clutching the wheel, half expecting the truck to be airborne, but everything was normal. The alien sat quietly, watching him as if it hadn't just unraveled the structure of reality in front of him. He wiped his face with his sleeve, trembling. What? What did you just do to me? Nothing you weren't ready for, it said. He laughed through his tears. I saw everything. I saw us, the living, the dead, the whole damn world glowing like we were lanterns in God's hands. You saw truth, the alien corrected. Now you understand how heaven and hell coexist. Every moment, every mile, every thought. They are not destinations, Calvin. They're choices, repeated until they become light or shadow. Calvin stared out at the empty highway, watching the moonlight shimmer across wet pavement. The world looked different now, quieter, fuller, alive in a way he'd never noticed. The loneliness he'd carried for years didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like space, room enough to listen. He exhaled slowly, the first peaceful breath he'd taken in decades. The alien looked ahead, its voice soft as dawn. Keep driving. Every mile is holy if you remember to see it. Calvin nodded, eyes wet, heart open, and for the first time, the road didn't feel endless. It felt like home. The rain eased to a whisper as the truck rolled out of the storm. Our pale fog lingered over the desert, glowing softly in the headlights. Calvin's heart was still raw from what he'd seen, souls floating like fireflies, the living asleep inside their own light. He drove in silence, feeling every hum of the engine like a prayer he didn't yet know how to say. The alien sat motionless beside him, eyes forward, expression unreadable, as if listening to something far away. When the road curved past a cluster of dead mesquite trees, the being spoke. Stop here. Calvin frowned. Here? There's nothing but dust and ghosts. Not ghosts, it said. Memories. He slowed, headlights sweeping across a small structure half hidden by the mist. It was an old roadside chapel, white paint peeling, roof sagging, the cross over the door tilted like a tired sentinel. A sign still clung to one post, letters faded. Desert Hope Mission, 1957. The windows were dark, glass long gone, replaced by wind and sand. Calvin shut off the engine. The silence outside was enormous. He could hear the faint ticking of the cooling engine, the sigh of wind moving through hollow beams. The alien opened the door and stepped down, its movements slow, reverent. Calvin followed, boots sinking slightly into damp sand. You picking the strangest places for a sermon, he muttered. Not sermon, the being replied softly. Remembrance. It walked toward the chapel. The door, though warped and swollen from decades of rain, yielded to its touch with a groan. Dust billowed outward in a slow, golden cloud, catching what little moonlight crept through the open doorway. The alien stepped inside like a pilgrim returning home. Calvin hesitated before following. The air was thick with the scent of decay and old incense. Wooden pews stood crooked, some collapsed entirely. A hymnal lay open on the floor, pages fused together by time. Through the broken ceiling, a single beam of moonlight fell upon the small altar, a cracked slab of wood crowned by a tarnished brass cross. The alien approached it, then stopped a few feet away. Do you feel it? Calvin looked around uneasily. Feel what? The residue of faith. Every prayer ever whispered leaves a vibration. The walls remember it. The air remembers. The wood still hums with it. He rubbed his arms. It just feels cold. Because you forgot what warmth sounds like. The being stepped closer to the altar. Its fingers brushed the surface gently, sweeping away a layer of dust. Places like this once served as doorways, not for power, but for remembrance. People came here to remember what they were part of. Calvin shifted uneasily. You talk like you were there. I was. We all were. Many of my kind walked among your ancestors, teachers, healers, watchers. Some came openly, others hidden. We took human form to speak your language, to help your species remember its origin. But your world has always feared what it doesn't understand. Many of us were called angels. Some were hunted as demons. Calvin's brow furrowed. You're saying, all those stories, the ones in the Bible, they were you? Not all, but enough to shape the myths that followed. We were never gods, only mirrors held up to your awakening. The words sent a chill down his spine. He looked at the broken pews, at the cracked plaster, where scripture verses had once been painted. You mean to tell me people worshipped you? The alien shook its head slowly. They worshipped the light reflected in us. But the reflection was never meant to replace the source. That's where things went wrong. Every age repeats the same error, confusing the messenger with the message. Calvin stared at it, his throat tight. Then what about Jesus? The question hung between them like a struck bell. The alien did not answer right away. It looked up at the cross above the altar, where the brass had darkened to green, the figure of Christ barely visible. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the being spoke, voice low, almost reverent. He was one of us. It paused, but also more. He remembered where he came from. Calvin's heart stumbled. Are you saying Jesus was alien? I'm saying he was awake. You can call that whatever you wish. The words hit harder than thunder. Calvin felt his knees weaken. No, he whispered. No, that can't be right. He was the Son of God. And what do you think that means? He blinked, speechless. Son of God, the alien continued softly, means one who knows he comes from the source. He didn't come to start a religion, Calvin. He came to remind you that divinity wasn't something to worship. It was something to remember. Calvin shook his head, stepping back. That's blasphemy. Only to those who profit from forgetfulness. Lightning flashed outside, turning the chapel windows white for a heartbeat. The alien stood motionless, haloed in the afterglow. Calvin whispered, You talk about him like you knew him. I did. The words nearly stopped his heart. That's not possible. He walked among us before he walked among you. His consciousness reached further than any of ours. We called him the Rememberer. When he became one of you, he did what we could not. He loved without fear. He proved that even in flesh, a being could hold the vibration of heaven. Calvin's breathing came shallow. You expect me to believe that the Son of God was some kind of visitor from the stars? No. He was the bridge between stars and flesh, between infinite and finite. He was human, so you'd know you could be divine too. Thunder rolled again, closer now, shaking dust from the rafters. The cross above the altar creaked on its mount. Calvin stared up at it and gasped. A faint light began to pulse from within the brass, soft and golden, as if something buried deep inside the metal had awakened. The glow spread slowly, outlining the figure nailed to it. The light was not harsh or blinding. It was gentle, alive, familiar. Calvin's voice broke. What's happening? The alien's gaze stayed fixed on the cross. Truth recognizes itself. The glow intensified just enough to cast long shadows across the chapel walls. Calvin felt warmth radiate from it, brushing his face like sunlight through a window. For a fleeting moment, he swore he could hear faint music, no instrument, just resonance, like the sound of breath becoming prayer. He stepped forward, whispering, I used to believe in this, in him. Then life just wore it out of me. Faith never dies, the alien said. It only sleeps. You can wake it by remembering that love and divinity are not separate things. He tried to show you that, but humans turned it into worship instead of practice. The glow from the cross faded to a steady shimmer, as though acknowledging what was spoken. Calvin looked around at the broken benches, the collapsed ceiling, the ruin that still felt sacred. "So all this," he murmured, "all the pain, all the confusion, it's just us forgetting?" "It's the cost of waking slowly. But even the slowest awakening is still awakening." Outside, thunder rumbled one last time before drifting away into distance. The air in the chapel stilled. Calvin felt something shift inside him. Small, quiet, but real. He turned toward the alien. "So where does that leave us now?" The being looked at him, eyes reflecting both sorrow and peace. "It leaves you remembering what you were made of. Light that forgot its own name." They stood there in silence. Dust hung in the air, swirling through the faint glow of the cross. For the first time in years, Calvin felt something break open inside him, something tender, ancient, and unbearably human. Outside, the desert waited beneath a clearing sky, and the old chapel held its breath, as if listening to the echo of prayers it finally understood. They stepped out into the desert night, leaving the chapel door yawning open behind them like a wound in the darkness. The rain had stopped, but the world still shimmered with moisture. A low wind moved through the sagebrush, carrying the faint metallic tang of ozone. Lightning flickered behind the distant clouds, washing the horizon in crimson light that pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Calvin wiped the dust from his hands and turned toward the alien, who stood facing the open plain as if listening to something buried under the silence. "Come," it said. "There's one more thing you need to see." Calvin hesitated. His body felt heavy, his heart unsteady. "You've already shown me too much. I don't think I can take any more." Truth doesn't ask permission. It only waits until you stop running. They walked until the chapel was just a shadow behind them. The ground sloped gently downward into a shallow basin scattered with stones that glowed faintly under each lightning flash. The air was warm now, almost feverish, and the smell of rain had turned into something sharper, like smoke that hadn't yet found a flame. The alien raised its hand. "Do you remember what I said about fire?" Calvin frowned, shaking his head. "Only that it burns. It does more than that. It reveals. Heaven's fire and hell's fire are the same essence, the energy of consciousness. Love turns it into creation. Fear twists it into torment. You decide which it becomes." As it spoke, the desert changed. The sand beneath them began to shimmer with a faint red glow, as though a great furnace were buried deep below the surface. Calvin took a step back, heart hammering. "What's happening?" "You asked to understand what comes after death. This is how it looks when consciousness meets its own reflection." The sky flared open with another strike of lightning, and the world erupted in color. Around them, forms began to appear. Not bodies, but shadows made of memory. Men and women, young and old, faces twisted not in pain, but in recognition. Flames licked through them, yet nothing consumed. They burned with images, moments of anger, betrayal, shame. A mother clutching a child she'd abandoned. A soldier seeing the faces of those he'd killed. A man watching his own lies take shape as smoke. Calvin stumbled back, horrified. "My God, they're burning alive!" "No," the alien said softly. "They're burning within themselves. This is not punishment, it's remembering. The fire doesn't come from outside. It rises from everything you've refused to heal." Calvin could barely breathe. The air trembled with heat that didn't scorch but sank deep, stirring his own buried grief. He felt it spreading through his chest, the weight of every cruel word he'd spoken, every prayer he'd abandoned. The heat moved like hands through his ribs, and suddenly he was seeing his own memories reflected in the fire. His wife in the hospital, eyes full of forgiveness he couldn't accept. His younger self shouting at a stranger for no reason but loneliness. All the nights he'd driven past broken-down cars because stopping would mean caring. He fell to his knees. The sand beneath him glowed with dull embers, warm but not burning. Tears ran down his face, hissing as they touched the ground. "Stop it," he begged. "Please stop." The alien knelt beside him. "I can't stop it. It's yours. Every being meets this moment. You called it judgment, but there's no judge, only reflection. The mirror you face when the journey ends is made of everything you ever refused to love." Calvin sobbed into his hands. "So this is hell?" "This is the misunderstanding that created it." He lifted his head, eyes red. "You're saying God doesn't send people here?" "God doesn't send anyone anywhere. The universe simply echoes. Love calls love back to itself. Fear calls fear. Every soul builds the temperature of its own eternity." Calvin's gaze swept over the burning figures. Their faces had changed. Some looked peaceful now, the flames around them softening to gold as they embraced something unseen. Others still writhed, lost in the smoke of their own refusal. He understood then that nothing was fixed. The fire was choice, repeating itself until it learned the shape of love. Lightning flared again, closer this time, and the wind roared through the basin. The flames bent and wavered, but did not die. Calvin pressed his palms into the sand, trying to ground himself. "All those sermons," he whispered. "All those years I thought hell was God's anger. But it's just us, isn't it? It's what we do to ourselves. It's what you do when you forget what you are. You are the flame, not the fuel." The alien's eyes glowed faintly, twin mirrors of the fire that danced around them. Calvin stared into them and saw himself reflected there, not as he was now, but as he could have been, shining and unafraid. For a moment, he saw his wife again, smiling at him through the haze, her light bright and gentle. She reached out, not to pull him upward, but to remind him he'd never truly fallen. The weight in his chest broke. A sound escaped him. Not quite a cry, not quite laughter. Something deeper, older. He bowed his head into the sand, shoulders shaking. The alien touched his back gently. "You've already been there, Calvin. Every time you hated yourself. Every time you mistook shame for penance. That was your own fire calling to be transformed." He lifted his face, streaked with dust and tears. "Then how do I stop burning?" "You don't. You learn to burn clean. Love is not the absence of fire. It's what happens when the fire finally remembers why it exists." Calvin looked around. The visions were fading, their flames dimming into faint points of light that drifted upward like sparks into the sky. The wind calmed. The desert grew quiet again, vast and alive. He whispered, "I think I understand now. We're all walking through the same fire, aren't we?" "Yes. Some turn it into light. Some call it hell. But it's the same flame." The last of the embers winked out. The sand cooled beneath his hands. Above them, the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing the first stars of dawn. They looked brighter than he remembered, pulsing faintly as if the universe itself were breathing. The alien rose and looked toward the horizon, where a pale strip of light was beginning to stretch. "Come," it said softly. "The night is nearly over." Calvin stood slowly, feeling lighter, cleaner, though his eyes were still wet. He glanced one last time at the place where the fire had been. Nothing remained but smooth, dark sand glinting in the starlight. Yet part of him could still hear it. The quiet roar of transformation, the echo of every soul learning to turn its pain into light. He followed the alien back toward the road, his footsteps leaving faint trails that the wind immediately began to erase. Behind them, the desert exhaled, red glow fading into silver dawn, as if the world itself had just remembered how to forgive. The first light of dawn bled over the desert, painting the sand in muted gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean of its fury. The horizon stretched in every direction, wide and empty, as though the world itself had been washed and made new. Calvin stood beside the truck, the engine still ticking softly from the night's long run. His clothes were damp, his face streaked with dust and tears, but something inside him felt impossibly light, like a stone finally set down after a lifetime of carrying. The alien stood a few yards away, gazing toward the east where the sun's first rim was breaking over the ridges. Its outline seemed softer now, less defined, as if the light were claiming it piece by piece. The desert wind moved around them, whispering through the brittle sage, carrying the scent of rain and iron. "It's time," the alien said. Calvin's stomach tightened. "Time for what?" "For me to go." He took a step forward. "Go? You mean leave?" "Yes. This world isn't mine to stay in. I was only meant to remind it of what it already knows." Calvin shook his head slowly, disbelief trembling in his voice. "After all this, you're just walking off into the sunrise?" The being turned to face him fully. In the new light, it no longer looked strange. The alien features that had once unsettled him now seemed familiar, gentle, almost human. "I don't walk, Calvin. I return." The air shimmered faintly behind it, like heat rising from asphalt, and for a moment Calvin thought it was a mirage. But then he saw it, a shape forming on the horizon, not descending from above, but unfolding from the very fabric of distance. It wasn't a ship in the way he understood ships. It was light bending itself into form, rippling with geometric grace, neither solid nor immaterial. It grew larger without moving closer, as though space itself was being rearranged to make room for it. Calvin's breath caught. "That's yours?" "Ours. None of us ever travel alone." He felt his throat tighten. "Will I ever see you again?" "You already are." The words made no sense, and perfect sense at once. The alien stepped closer. Calvin could feel the warmth radiating from its body, though there was no heat in the air. The being raised a hand and placed it lightly against Calvin's forehead. The touch was soft as breath, but what followed was anything but gentle. A flood of light poured through him, too vast to contain. His mind burst open like glass under pressure, and in that shattering he saw everything, every mile he'd ever driven, every diner where he'd sipped coffee alone, every roadside stranger who'd smiled without reason. Faces flickered through him, countless and luminous, all connected by invisible threads. He saw his wife, her laughter rippling across time like music. He saw his younger self, scared and angry, driving endless nights because standing still felt like dying. He saw every act of kindness he'd ever given, and every one he'd ever received, tiny sparks that now burned brighter than the sun. He felt the road itself hum beneath all of it, a single living artery running through the heart of creation. And then the voice, clearer than ever before, rose within him, not from the alien's mouth, but from somewhere deeper, older, inside his own bones. "You've never been alone on the road. Every journey was a prayer answered from within." Calvin gasped. The vision folded in on itself, the flood receding into stillness. The alien withdrew its hand, and for a moment the two of them just stood there, silent except for the whisper of the wind. He blinked, eyes wet, his breath uneven. Was that real? Everything real leaves a mark. Look inside. You'll know. He wanted to say something. Thank you. Goodbye. Anything. But the words felt too small for what was happening. He could only watch as the alien turned toward the horizon. The lightship shimmered brighter now, its form resolving into something almost like a living flame. As the being approached, its body began to dissolve into that same radiance, becoming part of the structure as if it were being reabsorbed by its own reflection. Calvin stepped forward, his voice cracking. Wait. The being paused, its outline wavering between human and something vast. Don't let the world convince you this was a dream. Dreams are the language of truth. Believe what you felt, not what they tell you. The light swelled, filling the air with a silent vibration that trembled through Calvin's chest. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, though the glow didn't hurt. It warmed. The ship, if it could be called that, lifted without sound, not up but outward, expanding into the horizon until it became indistinguishable from dawn itself. The sky swallowed it whole. Calvin stood there long after it vanished, the wind tugging gently at his sleeves. The desert was quiet again, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but alive, breathing, listening. He looked down at the ground where the alien had stood. The sand bore no footprints, no trace at all, but he felt something lingering in the air, like the echo of a voice still speaking softly inside him. He touched his chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. It pulsed in time with the rising sun. For the first time in years, he realized it wasn't loneliness he felt out here. It was connection. The same vast hum he'd always mistaken for silence. He turned toward the truck. The windshield caught the sunrise, flaring in gold. For a moment, his reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, brighter somehow, like he'd been lit from within. He climbed into the cab, closed the door, and sat there, letting the new warmth pour through him. The dashboard glowed softly, dust catching in the morning light. He whispered to no one, or maybe to everything, "I think I get it now." The road stretched ahead, endless, waiting. He started the engine. It rumbled awake, steady and alive. As he drove, the desert unfurled before him, glowing with the light of 1,000 unseen fires. The sky deepened from gold to blue, the sun climbing higher. The horizon shimmered, and for one impossible heartbeat, he thought he saw the faint outline of the ship again. Just a ripple in the air, a promise folded inside light. Then it was gone. Calvin smiled through his tears. He didn't chase it. He didn't need to. He pressed one hand to his chest and whispered, "Every journey was a prayer." The wind rushed through the open window, warm and full of life. Somewhere in that breeze, soft and familiar, he could still hear the alien's voice echoing. "You've never been alone on the road." The truck rolled on into the new morning, and behind him the desert shimmered, silent and infinite, holding the memory of everything that had ever learned to love. The morning air shimmered above the asphalt as Calvin steered east, the truck humming steady beneath his hands. The sun climbed slowly, burning through the last pale threads of dawn, turning the desert ridges behind him into silhouettes of memory. Every mile stretched open like a wound healing in slow motion. The world looked the same, miles of highway, half-dead shrubs, road signs leaning into the wind, but it didn't feel the same. Something had changed, not out there, but in him. He rolled down the window and let the wind rush in, carrying the smell of dust, diesel, and something sweet. like rain still clinging to the faraway air. The highway gleamed in the light, ribbons of gold unraveling toward forever. His reflection in the side mirror caught his eye for a moment, and he almost didn't recognize the man looking back. There was a softness there, something like peace, something like remembering. He whispered, half to himself, half to the silence riding shotgun, "Guess it's just you and me again." But this time, he didn't mean it like before. He knew now he wasn't alone. The hum of the engine had its own pulse, the wind its own breath, and the sky, God, the sky, felt awake. He passed a sign for a small town he'd never stopped in before. Population 260, it claimed, though the paint was cracked enough that it might have been less. A diner sat just off the exit. Chrome edges dulled by time, a flickering neon sign that read, "Eat here," blinking uncertainly against the morning light. Calvin pulled off without deciding to, as though something beyond him turned the wheel. The lot was mostly empty, except for a pickup coated in red dust and an old Chevy that looked like it hadn't moved in years. He parked the rig and climbed down, stretching his arms until his joints popped. The bell over the diner door jingled softly as he stepped inside. The smell of coffee and bacon hit him like a hymn. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile greeted him. "Sit anywhere you like, honey." He took a booth by the window, sunlight spilling across the cracked vinyl. She poured him coffee without asking, and for a moment their eyes met. Something in her gaze, warm, steady, unguarded, felt impossibly familiar. She asked, "Long night?" He smiled faintly. "Longest of my life." She chuckled. "You truckers always say that." He didn't answer. He just watched her move between tables, each step gentle, like she was walking through something sacred and didn't want to disturb it. The old jukebox in the corner flickered to life with a slow, dusty song from decades ago. Something about home and love and roads that never end. When she brought him a plate of eggs and toast, he thanked her. Really thanked her. She nodded like she understood the weight of it. As he ate, he looked around at the few people scattered through the diner, a man reading the newspaper, a young couple sharing pancakes, an old vet sitting alone by the window. Every one of them glowed faintly in the morning light. Every face shimmered with that quiet spark he'd seen in the alien's eyes, the same radiance, just hidden behind ordinary shapes. It was all there, everywhere, and he wondered how he'd ever missed it. He finished his coffee and left a generous tip on the table. As he walked out, the woman called after him, "Be safe out there." He turned, tipping his cap. "Always am." But as he said it, he realized it wasn't a lie anymore. Back on the road, the miles rolled under him like a slow river. The towns faded into open plains, telephone poles passing in rhythm, long shadows stretching and shortening as the day grew older. The hum of the tires felt different. Less noise, more music. The CB radio crackled now and then with static and stray voices, and he found himself listening, not for words, but for patterns, like the desert itself was speaking through every sound. He thought about what the alien had said, that heaven and hell weren't places but frequencies, states of being. He felt it now, vibrating in the air, shimmering through the sunlight on his windshield. Every choice, every thought, every act of kindness, it all tuned the signal one way or the other. Somewhere past the state line, he started talking softly to the voice inside him, the one that had been silent for years, but was now wide awake. "Maybe heaven ain't a destination at all," he said, the words flowing slow and steady like the road itself. "Maybe it's the moment you realize hell was never real to begin with. just the distance between who you are and who you were meant to be. The words felt right, like they didn't come from his mouth but from the part of him that had waited all his life to speak. He passed a field of wind turbines, their blades catching the sunlight like giant white prayers. Each rotation was steady, patient, eternal. The sound of them reached faintly through his open window, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Every now and then he'd see another truck heading west, headlights bright in the sun. Each driver gave the casual wave, 2 fingers lifted from the wheel. It used to be routine, an empty courtesy. But now, every wave felt like communion, a silent acknowledgement between wanderers. We're still out here. We're still moving toward something. Hours passed. The sky shifted from gold to pale blue, clouds drifting like thought. He felt no hurry to reach anywhere. The destination didn't matter anymore. The journey was the prayer. The motion itself was the answer. He began to notice small things, the shimmer of heat over the asphalt, the flash of a hawk's wings cutting across the light, the way the radio static sometimes hummed at just the right pitch to sound like harmony. Each moment was alive, each breath a tiny resurrection. He thought of his wife again, not with the old ache, but with gratitude. She was still there, somewhere in that hum, in that light. Maybe she'd never been gone. Maybe none of them ever were. As the highway stretched ahead, he smiled through tears that didn't sting. "You were right," he whispered, as though the being could still hear him. Every journey was a prayer. The wind answered, low and warm, carrying a sound that might have been laughter, or maybe just the world remembering its own voice. The miles blurred. The sun climbed high, turning the truck's hood into a mirror of gold. His rig became a small moving speck swallowed by horizon, the kind of sight you could miss if you weren't looking carefully. Yet in that vast emptiness, everything was full. The sound of the engine softened, merging with the wind, the hum of existence itself. And then came the silence, not empty, not cold, but sacred, the kind that doesn't end things, but begins them, the kind that feels like creation listening back. And somewhere within it, beneath the endless road and the boundless sky, Calvin Reid drove on, eastward, alive, awake, and home at last.